Here is a review of Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel. First of all, a little disclosure before I go on with this review. This whole video will be about my opinions on this book. This book itself is controversial, yes, in certain cases. Probably less controversial nowadays, but still controversial nonetheless. And some people might even just be offended by looking at the titles of this. For example, How Africa Became Black, being one of the few examples I'm just not going to talk about anymore. But regardless, this whole book itself is not a racist thesis, nor will this video be a racist thesis. Anytime I'm going to talk about anything about that, I always put in a little counter-argument or say that there's a counter-argument towards it, if I can remember it, that is. But let's get this started with. Firstly, Guns, Germs, and Steel. If you watched my summary video, which might have kind of sucks because, well, I was half asleep at the time. The thing is, Guns, Germs, and Steel, here we have a world in the sense of like guns, germs, and steel, and world history in the sense of prehistoric man towards the modern day kind of person who we are like experiencing right now. We find out why white people, aka Europeans, are the ones that dominated the world. Like Americans, you know, if you look at the Native Americans or Indians, as the racial derogatory word is given towards them, you can already see that they have very huge differences with the Europeans. And but however, Americans call themselves Americans, and they still look like Europeans, and vice versa in like Australia and certain parts of Africa. In fact, Elon Musk himself is actually South African. You probably knew that already, but for those of you who didn't know or are just ignorant, yeah, they're there. There's a fun fact. If you don't believe me, go on Wikipedia. He's also Canadian, and he's also an American, according to Wikipedia. Other than racial features, of course, we still have to talk about why Europeans became the dominant civilization in the world. Now, I already talked about longitude and latitude and guns, germs, and steel, and raw materials, and the right kind of knowledge in the right places, as well as the right kind of stimuli. Whereas Eurasia is the one where pretty much everything around the world tended to have its like bonuses and its peaks of interest. Jared Diamond himself goes ahead and shows why in this place of like the old world, mainly Europe and Asia, were the ones that became way more successful instead of other places like Australia or like the Americas. Certainly not Antarctica or the Arctic. Like these places, I forgot to draw the Americas, they weren't as successful for certain reasons. Mainly because there was no need for guns, there was no need for germs, or at least there was an impossibility to get germs as these guys could, and there was there was steel, but there was literally no need or probably unable to be using steel for the examples of the Polynesian Islands and Australia. This places being that there's low meat, so low protein, so that means low muscle build compared to Europeans at least, and as a result they cannot really do anything much about it. Even if they had steel metal war, there's pretty much nothing to use it for. They don't have anyone to fight, they don't have any oxes or whatever equivalent they could have to help with their agriculture, and they had to be semi-hunter-gatherers, agriculturers too, because, well, they cannot entirely survive on sweet potatoes, or whatever they went ahead and consumed at the time in Australia. Probably yams. No, that's Africa. Other than me and embarrassing myself with my very low racial knowledge of agriculture in certain places, that came out wrong, but certainly guns, germs, and steel are the one that played the biggest role. Germs being a bit more prominent nowadays, guns still being prominent, and steel is like pretty much everywhere. Like this thing has some kind of steel in it. This device I'm using has some steel in it. This charger, which I still don't understand why people make chargers look like this, has certainly some steel in it. The only thing I'm pretty sure that does not have any steel in it is this book, and then again, there's all this ink that was pressed into it by a machine that has steel in it. Everything in the modern world, you cannot get away with steel. Not even your favorite toys and stuff. They have some kind of steel, or at least a plastic equivalent of it. Germs themselves nowadays, we just came out of a germ pandemic, aka the COVID-19, and COVID-19 itself being one of the actual mildest kind of pandemics that we've ever had, at least compared to like stuff like the Black Death or yellow fever, or the kind that entrenched the trench warfare during World War II and World War I. And guns, well, they've existed as long as we've known, and they were always primary warfare machines. The Italians themselves went ahead and conquered Liberia or some African countries with guns, mainly because they were literally fighting the European tanks with bows and crossbows. So if that would ever work, But of course, there's way much more to really talk about other than that. For our guns, for germs and steels, we pretty much it was just a repeat of everything. As soon as steel was found, guns were invented with gunpowder, either by the Chinese indirectly to create fireworks, or by the Europeans to go ahead and just create machines of death or bombs. Take your pick. Whereas this became a trumping over like steel melee weapons. Melee weapons are still used nowadays. We still have germs that go ahead and do all the work for us. The germs are the main killers of this world of conquest. Personally, I myself believe that because of this pandemic, I was able to go ahead and learn much more about this, and become a much more enlightened person in the sense of like, yeah, I'm smart now. Here we have this working out by like, we literally have this one person in this case. In this case, the Europeans, when they invaded the Native Americans, they realized that these Native Americans had very low immunity, probably because they had less chances to create zoonotic diseases. As a result, having less zoonotic diseases, not saying that they didn't have any, compared towards the Europeans. As a result, they tried germ warfare, one of the earliest states of biological warfare, where they went ahead and sent blankets towards Native Americans as gifts, where in reality, the blankets themselves will be covered in smallpox or other diseases that the Native Americans themselves did not have immunity against. Thankfully, they are vaccinated and have mostly immunity towards all these vaccines nowadays, towards diseases nowadays, and thankfully, that's how it worked. This resulted in killing of around 95% of the Native American population and you can already see how many people there were with the European conquistadors. Very, very few, even compared to that remaining 5%. I'm pretty sure they were less than or much or less equal. So I just talked about guns, germs, and steel. Now, how am I going to talk about racial stuff and cultural stuff? Now, the whole point is why the Europeans themselves became the dominant force is because they had the perfect places for these three conditions to exist, for them to have guns, germs, and steel. Mesopotamia itself was just the first place in the world, mainly because it was in the Fertile Crescent, and they just happened to be Europeans. If the geography of our Earth was reversed, like let's for some reason, some alternate universe, the poles of where we would nowadays in our world called the Arctic would actually be like the deserts, like the equators, and the middle would be the cold ones, then maybe the Africans would have been the ones that went ahead and became, the agricultural societies, and they're the ones who succeed in everything. Not like that isn't likely so. More likely the world would just be flipped upside down. But in that world, this hypothetical world I'm talking about, then it would probably be the reverse. The blacks are the ones that trump over the whites or other races. But it's just because of geography and environmental physics. Environmental physics not being literal physics in the sense of like, hey, this is going to work out really, really well for us. How does this work out? It doesn't really work out well enough anyway. For our guns, for our germs, and our steels, this is incredible. And what else can I talk about? Oh, yeah. I forgot to mention about how this is relevant to our world. Wars are still happening, and it just so happens that the Europeans have the advantage, mainly because they had the Big Four leap. The Chinese themselves used to have this advantage of technology in the sense that they had this necessity, but then political changes happened within, and because of the unitary policies of China, they have a one-party policy till this day, ever since like China as a word existed. The government decides that one person shouldn't do this, then everyone gets to not to do it. Like, port building and exploring shit throughout the different worlds was actually one of the biggest things that the Chinese used to do until, like, eunuchs came into power, and they were like, hell nah, we don't want to do any of this. So they closed all the ports, and then they abandoned building, and by the time they could even think of wanting to explore again, they wouldn't have any feasible options for boats. And compare that to the Europeans, who are like politically disjointed, whereas they have like several factions, like 14, if not more factions. I'm pretty sure I'm undercounting how many countries there are in Europe. But the point is, with that multi-divisionary kind of countries, we have like everyone starts to reject something because it's new and ideal, but then one person decides to go ahead and accept it, and everyone finding out that it's a really good idea decides to accept it. This is how colonization itself came about. Christopher Columbus himself was Italian by birth, but after being rejected by pretty much every country except Spain, he came in and then asked the Spanish, who originally said no, but then asked them to let him go go west to go to the east. They finally said, yeah, sure, we'll let you do that. And then when they went ahead and arrived towards the Americas and then found out that this was a very successful trip and brought back a bunch of gold, every other country wanted in on it. Scotland, England, Ireland, Germany, France, Italy, all the big boys pretty much wanted it, especially Portugal. Portugal and Spain were the big rivals in this time until like the English got the better hand and then created a British Empire after merging themselves with the Scots when the Scots themselves failed their expedition and colonization of what used to be Spanish colony. I see. Other than talking about how Great Britain was born, I pretty much have other things to really talk about as well too. So yeah, that's pretty much just about it. What do I think of this and how is this relevant to me? Man, because I also live in unitary China, and China is slowly getting that advantage of, hey, we are ahead of the world now, and we will become ahead of the world again, just like we did in the ancient times, mainly because they were reintroduced to a technology, and we're Asians. We learn fast. So the big three, China, Japan, and Korea, and arguably it could be the big four if you decide to include India. They're going to go ahead and catch up towards this technological innovation fast, and because we're catching up, we're starting to go ahead and maybe even surpass the Europeans. The world order is changing. Certainly, the Asian man starting to become as powerful as the white man, if not more powerful. Yet that's a very dangerous thing to talk about. But then again, these are my opinions. I'm allowed to entitled to say anything, and YouTube cannot do anything to stop me from saying these. I'm not monetizing these anyway. But essentially, I like to learn about biology, the geography, and the cultural stuff, not the racist reasons that people just assume are true, mainly because it's just easier to say it that way instead of like creating an entire argument about it, like science does. But hey, that's just about it. I really, really hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Hunter and Sean, because next time, I will see you guys soon. Until then, Shihana, peace. Bye bye!